They say legends never die, but sometimes the truth about their final moments is buried deeper than any grave. Imagine a vault sealed for half a century, filled with secrets, whispers, and medical confessions too raw for the world to see. Inside that vault lies the final chapter of Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. For decades, fans have danced to his voice, mourned his loss, and debated what really happened in those final hours at Graceland. But now, after almost 50 years, the hidden files, the autopsy records, are surfacing, and the truth that emerges is far from the glitter and gold of his stage persona. It's a story of pain, secrecy, and a body that carried the price of fame. Elvis Aaron Presley was born on a cold January morning in 1935 in Tupelo, Mississippi. He came from humble beginnings, just another Southern boy with a voice that could move mountains. By the time he was 21, he was no longer just a man, he was a movement. His hips shook the world, his voice cut through every radio, and his name became synonymous with rebellion, style, and electricity. But what the world didn't see, beneath the flashbulbs and fame, was a man slowly consumed by the weight of being a legend. By the mid-1970s, Elvis's life had transformed into a delicate balancing act between public adoration and private collapse. The fans still saw the rhinestone suits and the charming smile, but behind closed doors his health was crumbling. Decades of touring, prescription pills, and emotional strain had left his body and mind in constant battle. He could still command a stage, but off it, he struggled to command his own body. The morning of August 16, 1977, began quietly at Graceland, his Memphis sanctuary. The mansion, once a symbol of triumph, had become more of a gilded cage. That morning, Elvis was restless, pacing, unable to sleep as usual. The night before, he had played racquetball with friends, laughing, sweating, trying to shake the shadows that clung to him. He told them he'd be heading to the bathroom to read and wind down. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. A few hours later, his girlfriend, Ginger Alden, went looking for him. She found him in the bathroom, lying face down on the floor. His skin was pale, his arms stiff, and his eyes stared blankly into nothing. The king of rock and roll was gone. The image haunted everyone who entered that room. Paramedics rushed to resuscitate him, but it was too late. At 3:30 p.m., the announcement came. Elvis Presley was dead at just 42 years old. The world stood still. Radio stations went silent. Fans collapsed in disbelief, and news anchors choked on their words. The man who had once seemed immortal, larger than life, had fallen in the most ordinary, tragic way imaginable. But almost immediately, questions began to swirl. How could someone so young, even with health issues, die so suddenly? What had really happened inside that bathroom at Graceland? The same afternoon, doctors at Baptist Memorial Hospital began the autopsy. It was conducted by a team led by Dr. Jerry Francisco, the Shelby County coroner. They worked quickly, methodically dissecting the myth from the man. Within hours, Dr. Francisco stood before cameras and declared that Elvis had died of cardiac arrest, that drugs played no role in his death. It was a clean, simple answer, one that could ease public hysteria. But behind the scenes, other doctors were not so sure. As the full pathology and toxicology results came in, whispers grew louder. There were traces of multiple prescription drugs in Elvis's system, painkillers, sedatives, and barbiturates. None of them alone were fatal, but together they painted a different story, a body overwhelmed by chemistry. Yet those findings were quietly sealed away. The official statement stood, "Heart attack, natural causes, nothing more." For the Presley family, privacy was paramount. They petitioned for the autopsy files to be sealed for 50 years, a request the court granted. Those documents, containing every intimate medical detail of Elvis's final hours, were locked away until the year 2027. The reason given was dignity, but the secrecy only deepened suspicion. Fans began to ask, what was in those files that the world wasn't allowed to see? Over the years, leaks and rumors surfaced. Some claimed to have seen fragments of the report. Others quoted unnamed insiders. A few alleged that the king's death wasn't a simple heart attack at all, but a complex web of drug interactions, chronic illness, and organ failure. There were even whispers of something stranger, autoimmune disorders, brain injuries, inflammation spreading through his body like wildfire. Whether fact or fiction, every story added another layer to the legend of Elvis's death. Doctors who revisited the case decades later offered their own interpretations. One recurring theory was polypharmacy, the combined effect of multiple medications. Elvis had been prescribed a staggering array of drugs for insomnia, pain, and anxiety. At any given time, he might take a dozen pills just to function. Experts argued that the mixture slowly eroded his health, damaging his liver, slowing his digestion, and weakening his heart. Elvis was also known to suffer from severe constipation, a side effect of his medications and poor diet. It wasn't just mild discomfort, it was chronic, debilitating. Friends and staff would later recall that he could go weeks without a proper bowel movement. In the autopsy notes that leaked, one doctor allegedly described an extreme case of intestinal blockage, so severe that it may have triggered a cardiac episode. Some speculated that he died while straining in the bathroom, the pressure on his heart too great to bear. The theory may sound crude, but it's medically plausible. When a person pushes hard during defecation, the body performs what's called the Valsalva maneuver, increasing pressure in the chest and reducing blood flow to the heart. For someone with cardiovascular disease and drug-induced stress, it can be catastrophic. Others believed Elvis's decline went deeper, an autoimmune crisis linked to a head injury he suffered years earlier. One physician, Dr. Forrest Tennant, suggested that Elvis's immune system had turned against him after a 1967 accident, causing chronic inflammation that attacked his organs over time. This theory painted Elvis as a man whose body had been fighting itself for a decade, his prescriptions masking symptoms rather than curing them. Regardless of which version you believe, one thing is clear. By the late 1970s, Elvis's body was failing him. He was overweight, exhausted, addicted to medications, and trapped in a cycle of performing, medicating, and enduring. He wanted to get better. Friends say he talked about touring again, marrying Ginger, and living quietly. But his body couldn't keep up with his dreams. Fans around the world struggled to accept the official explanation. To them, Elvis was too powerful, too magnetic to simply die in a bathroom. Rumors of foul play, government cover-ups, even faked deaths began circulating within days. Some claimed he was spotted at gas stations or airports. Others said he had fled fame entirely, living in secret. Conspiracy theories blossomed because the truth felt unsatisfying. The real story, a man destroyed by illness and dependence, was harder to face than fantasy. Meanwhile, medical experts dissected every clue available. Forensic pathologists analyzed what few public documents existed, noting that Elvis had severe hypertension, an enlarged heart, and signs of atherosclerosis. His arteries were narrowing, his blood pressure sky-high. Combined with years of sedatives, diet pills, and painkillers, his heart was a ticking time bomb. Even so, the exact sequence of events that killed him remains a mystery. Did his heart simply stop under the strain of decades of abuse? Did the cocktail of medications depress his breathing until his heart gave out? Or did he experience a sudden aneurysm brought on by pressure while straining? Every theory leads back to one haunting conclusion. Elvis Presley's body was breaking down long before that final day. His fame had granted him everything, money, power, adoration, but it also insulated him from help. Surrounded by yes-men and private doctors, he could obtain anything he wanted, anytime. If he couldn't sleep, someone gave him pills. If he felt pain, there was another prescription waiting. Each solution only deepened the cycle. The sealed autopsy files hold the key to how all those factors came together in his final hours. When they are finally opened, they will reveal the full list of drugs found in his blood, the condition of his heart and liver, and the detailed notes of every pathologist present that day. For the first time, we'll see exactly what decades of excess and exhaustion did to the king of rock and roll. But if early whispers are true, the picture isn't pretty. Some of those who claim to have glimpsed the files describe organs swollen and discolored, arteries hardened, and systems overloaded. They speak of an enlarged heart, a distended colon, and chemical imbalances so severe that survival was impossible. If that's accurate, the final report won't just confirm a cause of death. It will reveal a man who had been dying in slow motion for years. For years after his death, the official narrative stood firm: cardiac arrest. It was simple, neat, and dignified enough to protect the Presley image. But beneath that simplicity lurked questions that refused to fade. Why had the family been so determined to keep the autopsy sealed for 50 years? Why had one doctor been allowed to make a public statement before the rest of the medical team agreed on the findings? And why did so many of those who worked close to Elvis speak of his prescription use as an open secret? In the years following 1977, several of Elvis's physicians were investigated. One, Dr. George Nicopolis, known to fans as Dr. Nick, faced scrutiny for the sheer volume of prescriptions he had written for his famous patient. Records later revealed that in the final 8 months of Elvis's life, Dr. Nick had prescribed more than 10,000 doses of various pills. Painkillers, sleeping pills, tranquilizers, enough to supply a small clinic. Dr. Nick defended himself, insisting that Elvis was in constant pain and that he was trying to manage a difficult situation compassionately. But many saw it differently. They saw an icon surrounded by enablers. The people around Elvis described a man who could be both larger than life and heartbreakingly fragile. He was a king who craved control but was captive to his habits. Friends recalled his struggles to sleep for days at a time, his reliance on stimulants to perform and sedatives to rest, his fear of losing his voice or his audience. His body bore the brunt of that lifestyle, bloated from fluid retention, skin pale from lack of circulation, eyes tired behind tinted glasses. Yet despite all that, he still performed, still smiled, still gave the crowd everything he had left. Behind closed doors, though, the situation was dire. In the months leading up to his death, Elvis's inner circle noted dramatic mood swings, erratic energy, and constant fatigue. He had gained significant weight, his diet dominated by rich Southern comfort foods. Combined with high blood pressure and heart disease, his risk factors multiplied. When he complained of pain or insomnia, his team simply adjusted his prescriptions: more pills, higher doses, stronger sedatives. It was a modern tragedy disguised as care. Some accounts from Graceland staff paint haunting portraits of Elvis's final nights. He would retreat into his private quarters, his only company stacks of medical bottles, peanut butter sandwiches, and a Bible. He still loved to read scripture before bed, perhaps searching for peace that fame had denied him. He would sit at the piano in the early hours, playing gospel tunes softly into the empty air. To outsiders, he was still the king, untouchable. To those who knew him, he was a lonely man fighting a battle his fans could never see. As time passed, more and more people began to dig into the mystery of his death. Investigators, journalists, and biographers revisited every clue, every medical statement. In the 1980s, new information surfaced, suggesting that the toxicology report had detected 14 different drugs in his system at the time of death. Among them were codeine, Valium, morphine, and barbiturates. Individually, none were in lethal concentration, but together they created a perfect storm, one that likely suppressed his breathing, slowed his heart rate, and triggered cardiac arrest. Still, others believed there was more to it. Some doctors suspected that Elvis's digestive issues were central to the tragedy. Severe constipation can be a symptom of opioid use, and Elvis was no stranger to painkillers. According to some leaked testimony, his colon was abnormally enlarged, up to twice the typical diameter. It wasn't just discomfort. It was a medical crisis building quietly inside him. When he went to the bathroom that morning, his heart and abdomen may have been under extreme pressure. The act of straining could have caused a fatal arrhythmia or ruptured a weakened artery. The idea that the king of rock and roll died from such a mundane bodily failure struck many as unthinkable. But doctors remind us that the human body, no matter how famous, obeys the same rules as anyone else's. The combination of heart disease, high blood pressure, and the physical strain of constipation could indeed be fatal. If the leaked autopsy fragments are correct, Elvis's colon contained an enormous amount of backed-up waste, evidence of long-term gastrointestinal dysfunction. Another physician who revisited the case years later argued that Elvis's death was the inevitable result of chronic inflammation, a body-wide condition caused by years of drug toxicity, stress, and possibly earlier trauma. Some close to him recalled a fall he suffered in the 1960s, possibly injuring his head. If the brain had been damaged and his immune system had begun attacking his own tissues, it could explain his recurring symptoms: fatigue, insomnia, digestive pain, and erratic metabolism. If true, that would mean Elvis had been slowly dying for over a decade, his system fighting itself while he tried to maintain the image of perfection for millions of fans. In the early 1990s, another pathologist re-examined the available evidence and came to a sobering conclusion. Elvis did not die from an overdose. Instead, his death was the final chapter in a long story of self-medication and physical decline. His heart was enlarged, his arteries clogged, and his body overloaded with pharmaceuticals that dulled his pain but hastened his end. It's said that at the time of his death, Elvis's liver showed signs of fatty degeneration, a result of both his diet and drug use. His kidneys bore similar scars. Even his brain, according to those who've seen the data, exhibited mild edema, swelling likely linked to hypertension and toxicity. Every part of his body reflected years of damage. The man who had once seemed immortal was, by the end, fragile beyond belief. Yet for all the speculation, one fact remains. No one outside the Presley family and the Shelby County archives has seen the complete autopsy. The full toxicology results, the microscopic tissue studies, the doctor's notes, everything remains locked away, waiting for release in 2027. That half-century seal has only magnified the sense of mystery. Imagine what those pages might contain. The exact levels of each drug listed line by line, the weight of each organ, the condition of each artery, the recorded size of his heart, the presence or absence of lesions, the doctor's private annotations, perhaps disagreeing about causes or noting irregularities. Somewhere within those files lies the precise sequence that ended his life, and perhaps evidence that contradicts what the world has long believed. If the leaks are to be believed, the autopsy paints a devastating picture: multiple organs in crisis, systemic inflammation, and traces of drugs that interacted in unpredictable ways. One section reportedly mentions calcified arteries and an enlarged colon pressing against his diaphragm, making breathing difficult even at rest. Another supposedly refers to fatty degeneration of the liver, a classic symptom of long-term medication use and poor diet. The portrait that emerges is one of a man slowly crumbling beneath the glitter. His heart struggled to beat, his lungs strained to expand, his digestion all but paralyzed. Even in photos from his final tour, you can see it: the puffiness in his face, the fatigue in his eyes, the stiffness in his movements. He was performing through pain, a symbol of showmanship masking agony. But beyond the medical details, there's a deeper tragedy. Elvis's death wasn't just a physical failure, it was a failure of the system around him. A man adored by millions couldn't find real help. His entourage, doctors, and even family were trapped in a loop of enabling his habits because they couldn't say no to the king. Each prescription, each comfort, each indulgence was another nail in the coffin of a man who had once redefined music. The autopsy, when revealed, will likely confirm what many experts already know, that Elvis's body was failing in every direction. But it might also expose the culture that surrounded him, the medical complacency of the time, the ease with which celebrity could override caution. When those files finally open, the details could be more disturbing than anyone expects. We may learn that his organs were scarred far worse than assumed, that the list of medications was longer, or that the physiological stress leading up to his death was even more severe. We may discover that his death wasn't the result of one fatal mistake, but the cumulative effect of years of decline. Still, even those closest to the case admit that the truth once revealed will hurt. It will strip away the last illusions of invincibility. Fans will have to confront the reality that their idol was not a god but a man, vulnerable, flawed, and undone by the very pressures that made him a legend. The Presley estate has remained largely silent on what might be in the files, though statements over the years suggest a desire to preserve his dignity. Yet history doesn't wait forever. When the clock strikes 50 years, those pages will become public record, and the world will finally see the unfiltered truth of how Elvis Aaron Presley left this world. Even now, whispers circulate in the dark corners of the internet, claiming that snippets of the autopsy are already circulating among collectors. Whether real or fabricated, the interest shows one thing: people still crave connection to the man behind the myth. They want to understand what really happened in those final lonely hours at Graceland, because deep down, everyone who loved Elvis feels it, an ache that the story isn't finished yet. The music plays on, but somewhere beneath the rhythm lies a mystery still waiting to be solved. The days that followed Elvis's death were a blur of grief, disbelief, and confusion. Memphis became the epicenter of mourning. Thousands of fans lined up outside Graceland, some collapsing in the August heat, clutching flowers and photos. They came from every corner of the country, desperate to see the king one last time. Inside, the Presley family prepared a private funeral that felt more like a royal procession. His body lay in a white casket in the music room, surrounded by soft lighting and the faint sound of gospel music. He looked peaceful, almost like he was just resting between shows. But behind the calm facade, tension brewed. Reporters demanded answers. Law enforcement officers, aware of the public frenzy, pushed for clarification. Within 24 hours, rumors of drug involvement were already making headlines. Some tabloids claimed Elvis had overdosed on morphine. Others said he had been poisoned, or that someone in his circle had tampered with his medication. The official narrative was still heart attack, but the media had smelled blood, and speculation became unstoppable. The Presley family's decision to seal the autopsy only added to the chaos. To most people, sealing such a document meant there was something to hide. What could possibly be so shocking that the world had to wait half a century to see it? Journalists filed petitions, rival doctors gave interviews, and fan clubs split into factions, those who believed the official story and those convinced of a cover-up. In truth, the decision to seal the files wasn't entirely unusual for someone of Elvis's fame. His estate wanted to protect his image from sensationalism and to shield his daughter, Lisa Marie, who was just 9 years old at the time. The autopsy contained intimate details about his health, habits, and physical decline, things no child should have to read about her father. But despite good intentions, secrecy always breeds curiosity. Within a few months, several of the doctors who participated in the autopsy began to talk quietly to friends and journalists. None would share full reports, but small details began to leak. One mentioned that Elvis's heart was twice the normal size. Another claimed his liver was severely damaged, almost cirrhotic. Others spoke of advanced colon impaction, high cholesterol, and arterial plaque buildup. Piece by piece, an image emerged of a man whose body had been pushed far beyond its limits. The most haunting detail came from someone who claimed to have seen the body before the autopsy began. They described Elvis as pale and bloated, with his stomach distended and his tongue slightly swollen. To medical professionals, those are classic signs of cardiac arrest combined with respiratory failure, conditions that could easily be triggered by drug interaction or physical strain. Meanwhile, Dr. Nick faced mounting legal pressure. In 1981, he was charged with overprescribing controlled substances to Elvis and other patients. During the trial, prosecutors presented staggering numbers of prescriptions: amphetamines, barbiturates, opiates, all signed by Dr. Nick. But the defense argued that Elvis had legitimate medical issues that required treatment: glaucoma, arthritis, hypertension, insomnia. Dr. Nick was eventually acquitted, though his medical license was later revoked. The verdict did little to clear the air. If anything, it deepened the sense that Elvis had been failed by those meant to protect him. As time passed, researchers began to connect the dots between Elvis's medical history and his lifestyle. His mother, Gladys, had died young from heart failure and liver problems, suggesting a hereditary predisposition to cardiac disease. Combine that with Elvis's eating habits: deep-fried peanut butter sandwiches, bacon, banana, and mayonnaise, and his fate seemed tragically inevitable. His diet was rich in fat and sugar, his exercise minimal, And yet he continued performing exhausting tours that demanded immense stamina. By 1977, his daily routine was less that of a rock star and more that of a patient. He would wake up late in the afternoon, take a series of pills just to get moving, then eat his first meal of the day, a massive Southern breakfast. He would rehearse, spend time with his entourage, and then take more medications to relax. At night before bed came the heavy sedatives. Some accounts claim he swallowed up to 6 or 7 different pills before trying to sleep. His liver, kidneys, and heart were working overtime every single day. A nurse who once treated him described him as a man trapped in his own body. She said that he was kind and polite but carried an aura of exhaustion. His blood pressure readings were dangerously high. His weight fluctuated by dozens of pounds in a single year. He sweated profusely even when sitting still. All warning signs of impending cardiac crisis. And yet, no one could stop him. As the 1980s gave way to the 1990s, the fascination with Elvis's death only grew. Books and documentaries dissected every known fact, and former insiders began releasing memoirs. Each one offered fragments of truth, wrapped in layers of emotion. Some admitted they had seen the drug problem firsthand but didn't know how to intervene. Others insisted that the rumors were exaggerated, that Elvis's death was purely natural. But medicine rarely lies, and what evidence remained told a consistent story. His heart was enlarged. His arteries were thick with plaque. His liver and kidneys were struggling. His colon was impacted. His system contained traces of narcotics, sedatives, and painkillers. Each of these factors alone could have been managed, but together, they created the perfect storm. By the time modern forensic science began re-examining famous cases, experts applied new understanding to Elvis's condition. Some suggested he may have suffered from a genetic disorder, such as alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, which can cause liver and lung disease. Others pointed to adrenal exhaustion caused by decades of stimulant use. Each hypothesis added dimension to the picture, but led to the same endpoint. His body simply couldn't keep up. Perhaps the most heartbreaking revelation came from those who spent his final day with him. They said Elvis seemed upbeat that morning. He was planning a trip, talking about new recordings, and even joking about his weight. He was excited to get back on tour. No one suspected that within hours he would be gone. The king still believed he had time. When the ambulance left Graceland, fans followed in their cars. Some wept openly on the streets of Memphis. Others stood silently, watching history fade into the horizon. And somewhere inside the hospital, as doctors worked in vain to revive him, a nurse whispered, "We're losing Elvis." It was as if the world stopped breathing. Decades later, people still travel to Graceland, leaving flowers and letters at his grave. Many of them weren't even born when he died. They come not just for the music, but for the mystery, the desire to understand how someone so powerful, so vibrant, could fall so suddenly. They come to mourn, but also to connect with a story that feels deeply human. When the autopsy is unsealed, those visitors may finally get their answer. The document, rumored to span dozens of pages, will likely confirm what has long been suspected. Elvis died from a complex combination of cardiovascular disease and drug toxicity. But more than that, it will reveal how fame, pressure, and self-medication intertwined to destroy him. Historians expect the report to show the specific drug levels found in his blood and organs, the degree of blockage in his arteries, and the state of his internal systems. They believe it will prove that his death wasn't sudden at all. It was a slow, painful decline culminating in a single moment of collapse. And yet, the autopsy will also show something else, that even at the very end, Elvis was fighting. His body bore scars of effort, of trying to live, to perform, to stay present. He may have lost the battle, but not without struggle. When those pages are finally opened to the public, it will be more than a revelation. It will be a reckoning. The world will confront the truth behind the legend, not the glittering superstar, but the man who carried the unbearable weight of expectation, pain, and loneliness. In many ways, the story of Elvis's autopsy isn't just about how he died. It's about how fame consumes those who live for it. It's a mirror held up to every artist who gives everything and ends up with nothing left to give. As the years rolled on, Elvis became more myth than man. The Graceland mansion turned into a shrine, a living museum filled with echoes of laughter, heartbreak, and song. Millions walked through those gates, some whispering prayers, others just wanting to feel close to the legend they had lost. But beneath the souvenirs and memorabilia, a darker truth lingered, locked away with those sealed autopsy files. Every photograph of his smile, every gold record on the wall, seemed to hide the silent pain of a man who could make the world dance, but could not save himself. In the decades that followed, medicine evolved, culture changed, and the way we saw celebrities transformed. Addiction and mental health were no longer dirty secrets whispered behind closed doors. People began to understand that even the brightest stars could crumble under the same pressures as anyone else. In that light, Elvis's death took on new meaning. He wasn't just a cautionary tale. He was a symbol of the cost of perfection. Friends who survived him spoke more openly as time softened the wounds. They said he was kind, generous, deeply spiritual. He prayed often, gave freely, and loved his fans fiercely. But they also admitted he was haunted by insecurity. He feared aging, feared losing relevance, feared disappointing the people who adored him. He once told a close friend, "It's hard to live up to an image." That single sentence captures the tragedy of his final years. He wasn't just trying to stay alive. He was trying to live up to the myth of Elvis Presley. Every new anniversary of his death brought another wave of analysis. Television specials, documentaries, endless discussions about what really killed him. And with every retelling, one theme remained constant. Elvis was trapped. The fame that had lifted him from poverty also became the golden cage that isolated him from reality. When he needed genuine help, few dared to intervene. When he needed rest, the machine of show business demanded another tour. When he needed simplicity, he was surrounded by opulence. By the time the 21st century arrived, technology had advanced enough for experts to digitally reconstruct portions of his autopsy data from surviving notes. Those simulations confirmed much of what had been whispered for years, that his heart was enlarged nearly twice normal size, that his colon was impacted and his liver fatty, and that his system contained traces of multiple sedatives and painkillers. Even without seeing the full report, science had already spoken. Still, there's something deeply human about wanting to see the truth in writing, to see the black ink that documents the final reality of a legend. That is why the world waits for 2027. When the autopsy is unsealed, there will be renewed shock, renewed sorrow, but also a strange sense of closure. People will finally read what the doctors saw that day at Baptist Memorial Hospital. They'll see the numbers, the notes, the physical evidence of a man whose body could no longer bear the weight of being Elvis Presley. But what if the release of those files brings not only medical truth, but emotional redemption? Maybe then people will stop asking how he died and start remembering how he lived. Maybe they'll see beyond the headlines of drugs and heart failure and remember the voice that shook the world, because before the tragedy there was triumph. Before the whispers of scandal, there was the sound of a guitar that changed music forever. Elvis wasn't just a singer. He was the bridge between worlds, black and white, gospel and rock, past and future. He gave the world permission to move, to feel, to rebel. And that energy still lives on in every artist who dares to push boundaries. In many ways, the story of his autopsy isn't an ending at all. It's a mirror reflecting the price of greatness. It reminds us that even legends bleed, even icons break. It forces us to see the man behind the myth, the human being behind the crown. And maybe that's the greatest legacy of all. Because when you strip away the fame, the fortune, the glittering costumes, what remains is the simple universal truth: he was just a man trying to hold on. A man who loved his music, his fans, and his family. A man who made mistakes but kept giving. A man who, despite everything, believed in love, faith, and redemption. The day those autopsy files are finally revealed, the headlines will explode. There will be documentaries, debates, and endless analysis. People will argue about what the numbers mean, whether the doctors were right, whether history needs to be rewritten. But once the noise fades, what will remain is not the science. It's the silence that followed his final breath. The silence of a world realizing that something irreplaceable had ended. And in that silence, maybe people will finally understand. Elvis didn't die because he was reckless or weak. He died because he was human. Because the same drive that made him great, the relentless need to give more, do more, be more, was the very thing that broke him. It's a story as old as fame itself. The spotlight gives and it takes away. It crowns kings and leaves them alone in their castles. For Elvis, that castle was Graceland. For the rest of us, it's the haunting reminder that even legends have limits. So when you think of the autopsy, don't picture a cold table or sterile instruments. Picture a man who sang his soul into the world, who burned brighter than anyone before him. Picture the laughter, the generosity, the spark in his eyes. Picture the young boy from Tupelo who dreamed big and dared to make the dream real. Because the truth, the one no document can hide, is that Elvis Presley's heart may have stopped beating, but his spirit never did. It lives in every song that makes you tap your foot, in every stage light that flickers to life, in every fan who still believes in magic. The files might tell us how he died, but the music tells us why he lived. And maybe when those final pages are opened, we'll finally stop chasing the mystery and start honoring the man. Not the autopsy, not the myth, but the human story of a soul that gave everything for the world and paid the ultimate price. Because the king of rock and roll never truly left the building. He's still here, echoing through time, reminding us that greatness and fragility often walk hand in hand. And when the truth of those files finally comes to light, it won't destroy his legacy, it will complete it. The revelation won't be good, it won't be easy, and it won't be pretty. But it will be real. And for a man who spent his life living between fantasy and fame, reality may finally set him free. The lights at Graceland will keep glowing. The songs will keep playing. And somewhere in that eternal rhythm, the king will still reign. Not in flesh, but in memory. Forever immortal, forever human, forever Elvis.